Hey there, it's Erin, and I've got some exciting news. We are actually all getting excited and preparing for the latest Salgado to arrive. If you don't know who that is, that's actually Rachel, who is our podcast editor. If you subscribe to our emails, you then remember her from her awesome weekly emails that recap the podcasts that come out. So Rachel's been our right hand woman for years, and she's welcoming little Isaac into the world, who will join his brother Ian. And so we thought is a great opportunity. One, we want to give her a breather. She needs maternity leave. She needs to walk away from editing. But we notice how many new listeners, or maybe even old listeners, go back and listen to old episodes. And we've got like 200 episodes. So it's just amazing when we look at our statistics, how many people scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and go even all the way back to episode 1. So we thought this is a great opportunity to sprinkle in some of the best, most listened to episodes that people just love, that they keep going back to, that also are probably, a year plus old. And so we want to make it easy too for you. So you don't have to scroll and scroll and scroll. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this podcast from the vault.
But I get a call from the lunch lady, and my daughter I think she was in first grade. And the lunch lady says, did you really want to give your daughter a pound of ham for lunch? And I can see myself, I know I made that sandwich, but I ended up putting the sandwich in the meat tender and then putting, the pound of ham in her lunchbox. And I just, I could picture them going, oh, there's that Renee again, the corporate woman that just can't pay attention to her children. And I said to her, I said, do you have any crackers you can, pair that
with? Welcome to the Because podcast with Erin and Nicole.
Wait, are we recording?
Yes, this is our intro. So we've been friends long enough to basically go from idiots to executives.
And then we got fed up with the fake working world, the rat races, and all the parts of our lives where we needed a costume to cope.
So if you're in, drop the superhero disguises and the photo filters and join us as we explore and empower authenticity everywhere.
Everywhere.
Hey, Nicole, did you know that I actually have free stuff to help people with their careers?
Is that like the free tough love career flogging that you give me every week on the podcast?
No. Yes, but a little bit nicer, a little more organized, and probably a tiny bit more helpful. My favorite is a free video course I call Unstuck Yourself.
Well, who doesn't want to get unstuck, Erin?
Yeah, exactly. So anyone can sign up just by simply going to beauthentic.inc/unstuck.
I am your number one fan. I'm there already. Unstuck me, girl.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. This is a good one. I'm here with my friend, and I can only describe her as a complete badass, Renee Zaugg. And Renee is currently the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, and a Vice President for Otis Elevator. And we're talking, right, $13 billion company, huge worldwide enterprise. And prior to that, she was actually the head of, she was an SVP and a head of infrastructure and cloud services at CVS, which is a Fortune 5 company. And prior to that, she was at Aetna in a number of leadership roles, including heading up infrastructure. She's also a huge women's advocate. So you'll hear about the different leadership roles. And that's really how we met in her leadership in starting a women's organization within Aetna. So I think it's going to be really fun. We're going to talk about her journey, her tidbits, her lessons that she can share with you, and just have a good time. So thanks for being here, Renee.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy to see you. And I love your journey too. And I feel like I've been a part of it as we, took on some incredible advances in Aetna and watching you just rise and become your own CEO. It's just fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, you shaped so much of what I did, and we'll talk a little bit. But Renee, I consider a major sponsor of my career, and make sure you read the acknowledgments in the book that's coming out because I did not leave that out. So I wanted to start first with So first of all, you're this executive, woman executive of a big company, which is sort of still unfortunately a unicorn, but also in technology. And so I just want to understand a little bit about did you always have aspirations to be this corporate executive in technology, or what was young Renee like? And tell me a little bit about that early journey.
That's really funny, Erin, because you know how in high school you do those time capsules? And we had to write a letter to ourselves, and it actually made it to my home 15 years after graduating. And I don't know how they did it, but no, I had no aspirations to be an executive. I had aspirations to travel around the world. And, and in those days, it was potentially be an airline stewardess. But anybody that knows me, I'm too clumsy, and that would never, that would never be a good mix. But no, I started off in technology in a very operational role. And, and I was just trying to learn the technology. But I always knew I wanted to be a leader. It wasn't that I wanted to be an executive. I just had this innate ability throughout my entire life, either in school, in my family. I was always the one at the head table. In a crisis, I was always the one, okay, let's get organized. This is not as bad as you think. And so I've always had this love for leadership and love for influence. And so to say, my career, I want to be an executive, I want to be a CEO, I want to be, I had never had those aspirations. Those sort of naturally came as I started to mature in my capability and gain more confidence, and knowing that, just because I have not checked that box doesn't mean I can't do that box.
I love that.
And so, so that's how my career went. And I always seemed to step into a really good challenge that had tremendous influence. I'm just an opportunity seeker.
I love that. What was as you think back, what was sort of the biggest thing that you achieved that, at the time or early in your life, you would have thought that was just completely impossible? Does something come to mind?
When I actually was promoted up into a vice president, right? And was giving a very large organization at that time. It was right before a large acquisition. We knew that acquisition was coming. And I was given all of the infrastructure and application development. And I never really did application development before. So I'm like, how can I possibly do all of this? And at the same time, re-engineer and re-strategize what the operating model would look like. And, I remember getting the role saying, can I do this? And but then I thought, of course I can, because who else would? I always think to myself, who else would do this? They're not good enough. I'm better than them. I could do this. And so, that was a big deal for me, to finally get that executive title and being a woman, being in technology, and actually having the chops to back it up. And so, I remember telling my dad, and he just started to cry. And he was just so super proud. And he just looked at me, he goes, this is not about people carrying you along. It's how you carried yourself. And so that was huge for me. And once that happened, the inertia, not afraid to change, not afraid to transform, just keep going.
So I want to dive into that a little bit because, I sort of nodded as you said, I thought about who else could do it. And I often joke, like, sometimes you have to even tell yourself stories like, oh, they'll just bring in some dude that'll screw it all up.
Right.
The reality is so many people, so many of our listeners, they actually sing a very different song in their head, right? As I call it, a sucky song. When those things come up, what do you think gave you the ability to, either A, have the confidence, or on the back end, basically assume that anyone else couldn't do it? And,
right.
And tips for our listeners, and like, how do you do that? Was that something that came natural, or?
Well, I'll give you an example. And then I'm going to take you way back in my career. When I was just, it was, I was first line management, my first management job. I was the head of an operations center that had 4 different shifts. And I was the only female leader. And my male counterparts were doing far less than me. Like, I jumped in my new management role. I want to take on an acquisition. I want to change the way we ran operations. So I was leading all these things, and they were just sort of coming along for the ride. And then I thought, what's next for me? Right. Because I get bored after a while. And if things are working really fine, and because that's what you want, that's what a leader wants. You want your team to rise up and be self-sufficient. Right. So the next level role came available, and I heard that they weren't even going to open it up. They were just going to hand it to one of these guys.
Hmm.
And I had this fire in my belly saying, I know I am far more capable just by my actions, by what I was doing. And, I went right in and I said, if you don't consider me for this role, I want to go back to being just a technical individual contributor. And I think that was very eye-opening to them. And guess who got the job?
You know what, Renee, that's so powerful, because a lot of times there has to be some sort of action forcing event, and you never want an ultimatum to be inauthentic or threatening or you play the game. But at the same time, if you sometimes don't have that alternative that's going to be a negative to them, it's hard to get their attention.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not to say that I've been that forceful in every moment of my career. I mean, there have been times where I felt completely passed over. Right. And that's probably what brought me to the Women's Leadership Alliance.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about it. Let's go there. If you haven't noticed, listeners, we still have a major gender diversity issue at the top in particular. And, while most companies have some sort of employee resource group, HR sort of leads initiatives, you looked at a little bit differently, Renee. It wasn't really your job. So talk a little bit about WLA and what prompted you to do that. I mean, first and foremost, it's a great example of where you went and did something that wasn't your job.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, at the time, I was head of strategy and was the chief of staff to the CIO. And I was doing the diversity and inclusion plan and looking at the numbers. Obviously, tech is a very tough field for gender parity. It was very clear that we had an issue, but I was running the numbers and I noticed that the only one that was reporting to the CIO that wasn't a VP was myself. And I thought, I've done all those jobs, but what was happening that I wasn't getting that promotion and I wasn't advancing? And so then I actually pulled the company data. And, being a service company, we were 76% women. And then if you start going through management and the layers of management, all the way up to executive director, women were leading at 68%, which made sense because of the demographic of the workforce, right? But when you went from executive director to vice president, it dropped off to 23%. And I just sat back and I thought, something is very wrong here because it's not a pipeline issue. There's a badass pipeline there, right? These are high potential, high performing women. But there was something very systemic at that layer that is causing women to either not take the job or go for the job, or they weren't seen as, agentic enough in business strategy or, and so I thought, I'm going to do some research. And I looked at some McKinsey surveys, and PwC. And I found that companies that really had purposeful programs, right? Not just, hey, let's all get together and talk about, nursing babies and all this sort of stuff. I mean, purposeful programs for high potential and high performing women that you can actually move the needle. And so that's when we started the Women's Leadership Alliance, which was very focused. It wasn't a general women's, ERG. It was focused on pushing women to that executive tier. And I have to say, it wasn't just, there was multiple things influencing the change, but in the 4 years that we did that, we changed it from 23% to 35.5%. So, I believe in it, but but I hope that we're starting to get a little inertia. And I honestly believe gender parity in the issues women have go way back. I mean, women have really been in the workforce. I mean, my mother, she was a working mother, right? I think a lot has to do with women are just really going full out in the workforce and haven't quite figured out, what do I have to give up?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget a conversation I had with my boss. And she's brilliant, smart, disciplined, and yet she didn't have a family. And I brought to her the concept of this Women's Leadership Alliance, and she says, "Well, Renee, I gave up,
Mm-hmm.
a family to have this career," and she had an amazing career. And I looked right at her and I said, "So you're telling me I have to choose?" And I said, "Funny, I thought our CEO had children. Did he have to choose?"
He does.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's so.
And then I started listening to CFO. I said, he has children. Did he have to choose?
Mm-hmm.
So I started, and she just said, "Okay, you got me. Let's do this." And so that pretty much put me on the map with the company. I got the backing of many powerful people, and I made many networking connections as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I have to use this quote here, which is, something like, when you get to the top, remember to send the elevator back down.
Yeah.
And you did. So you sent that down in many ways, but you sent it down to me. And I just wanted to mention that here. Renee actually asked me to co-chair the Women's Leadership Alliance with her, which was incredible honor, because here's a group that had not only done great things and was big and prestigious, but literally was her baby. She wasn't tasked with it. She did it out of her own doing. And so thank you for allowing me to do that. I admit that I felt a little guilty that maybe less than a year in, I announced my retirement. So I wasn't going to be able to take on the baton completely. But, I think that's one thing that you do really well. And you mentioned at the beginning, you do send that elevator back down. I'm sure our listeners are like, yeah, you're right, Erin, total badass. Like, and if you saw Renee, I love beautiful juxtapositions, and she's a total badass, but she's maybe 5 foot tall. I think you're shorter than me. She's this sweet, she's, beautiful grandmother of the most adorable little girl. But talk a little bit about, so you had sort of an air of confidence, but you had some external issues in your way with, sometimes getting the promotion and stuff. What was the one thing that was your own biggest, sort of limiting belief, limiting factor, thing that you had to overcome as you worked on your career?
It's the ability to speak publicly. And a lot of people are shocked at that. I have a speech impediment that I had to work on. And
No idea.
Yeah, well, all through school, I had, speech therapy and a little bit of a stutter, and which, obviously you don't want to get out in front and speak. And anyone that knows me knows that I work really hard at it. When I am in front of 500 people and speak, I will spend an hour practicing. I even went as far as putting pictures of heads on chairs, right? To
Yeah.
overcome my fear of speaking. So that was something I always had, but pushing myself to do it is what allows you to overcome it. And it's really interesting now that we're on Zoom and we're basically looking in the mirror all day long, right?
I know, it's the worst. We never had to do that before.
Oh, yeah. And that to me is even hard, right? Knowing that I have to have this facial, the way I look, not only the way I sound and how I come across. So I have a difficult time sometimes distilling my point, and a lot of it has to do with I'm so focused on my diction. So that was a big thing for me, but I'm still working at it. I will always work at it, and it'll it'll improve over time, I'm sure. And by the time I'm done with my career, I'm going to be a great TED talker, just like you.
Well, it's so interesting. So I've known you for like 4 or 5 years and honestly never have even for slightly like, oh, every once in a while, Renee, don't see it at all. So amazing. And it's so funny that you should say that about the TEDx. Actually, one of my fellow TEDxers, he actually did his third TEDx in the event that I did. His first one was how I overcame my stutter. And that was his first TEDx. So his name's LeBron Barton. He's an incredible gentleman. And I'll make sure I send you TEDx.
I can't wait to see it.
Yeah. I think that'll really resonate. I want to pivot a little bit. So as I mentioned, you're a grandmother, which means you're probably a mom, which I know you are. So you are also a working mom, which I know a lot of our listeners are. How did you balance that? And specifically, like, what are one or two, suggestions that you might have for folks? But like, was that easy? Which is the most loaded question ever. Tell us a little bit about your experience of, juggling those two things.
It's not easy. What I've learned is everybody's life is a mess to some degree. And it's okay to be not perfect. It's not just your children. I actually think this is a thing that is missed in sort of the tech books or the textbooks, and it's your husband as well. So it's like the unspoken thing about your spouse in your career. It's always everything. It's, how can you juggle the kids and their activities and stuff like that? How do you juggle your husband and the children? Because they all have demands of you, right? And I found that setting aside time for us was critical, because if this fell apart, the other piece of the engine wasn't going to work so well. So that was one of the hard things is to make sure that you're paying attention to yourself and your spouse. And if you don't, you have to pay attention to yourself. Right. And so that's a hard concept, because it sounds so selfish when you are a parent, right? I just need to go and take a walk, or I'm going to go shopping with nobody. Right. So sort of taking that me time and having that think time. I used to use a lot of my travel time for my me time. Right. Either even if it's on the way into work, it's either organizing my day in my head, doing my gratitudes in my head, listening to a podcast that or an ebook on the plane. Then I know my husband would say, "Oh my God, can you put that book down and can we talk?" Right. So it's those kinds of things that, just help you manage it all. It's really about management and stopping and saying, okay, I need to be there for my children at those very poignant moments. And you don't want to miss that because it goes so fast, right?
Yeah.
Next thing you know, they're gone, and you're you're redefining yourself again.
So, Erin, I hear you're unleashing your latest secret weapon, and I don't think the boardroom is ready for it.
Yeah, I wrote a freaking book. Can you believe it?
I believe it, because you always do you.
That's a fun play on words. Yeah, so You Do You-ish is available for pre-order, and I am super excited. It basically shoves aside all that crusty, decades-old mother's career advice, and I truly show people how you can use authenticity as your secret weapon to have a big career without compromise.
These are your big guns blazing, girl. Where do people find it?
Well, people can find my big guns at beauthentic.com/you-do-you-ish. And if you pre-order it now, I have all kinds of fun bonuses and freebies. And we've already had almost 400 people pre-order it. So I hope you'll join the fun.
I've already bought it because I've heard I'm in it. Can't wait.
Thanks, girl.
No, I agree with that. I talk a lot about that. I think I couldn't agree more that we always say it's about, the kids. I'm like, the kids will be fine. The kids are fine. They might whine that you're going on another trip or whatever. It's really the spouse that is often the biggest challenge. And the way I used to always think about it, to not feel selfish if I was focused on him, was that what is the number one thing I can give my children? It's a happy, healthy home, right? Like at the top of the list, right? Nothing beats us, staying together,
Right.
staying happy, etc. So I couldn't agree more. I remember one time you told me a funny story about, there's nothing, I think, not just me, oh my God, there's a whole market now on moms that are messes, right? Like right? Scary mommies of the world and the I mom so hard. It's so funny. It's like, thank God everybody's come out of the woodwork that we all just desire and demand this imperfection and laughing at just how messy it is. But remember you told me a story about one of your less than perfect moments that you had when you took your daughter to school. Tell that story.
Yeah. So back in the day, we didn't have cell phones, right? So I am dating myself a little bit. I get a call from the lunch lady, and my daughter I think she was in first grade. And the lunch lady says, did you really want to give your daughter a pound of ham for lunch? And I can see myself, I know I made that sandwich, but I ended up putting the sandwich in the meat tender and then putting, the pound of ham in her lunchbox. And I just, I could picture them going, oh, there's that Renee again, the corporate woman that just can't pay attention to her children. And I said to her, do you have any crackers you can, pair that with?
I love it.
It was a funny moment. Another funny moment was, I had this rule with my kids, don't call mom at work unless, you're throwing up or bleeding, right? Right. It has to be a real emergency. So I was actually on stage at a leadership summit, and my assistant, was flagging me down. She goes, it's your daughter. And she says, it's an emergency, you get the heart that just drops to your stomach. And I had to run and find a phone, and I get on the phone and she says, can I shave my legs? And I know I have this whole audience here. Yeah. And I said, Danielle, that is not an emergency. She goes, to you? She goes, I'm the only cheerleader with hairy legs.
Massive emergency.
Right. And I'm like, no, she's never shaved her legs before. So I'm like, no, you're not going to do that with me, not there. And it was just so funny. So I'm arguing with her. Well, I have a whole audience of people in there. So, it's those things that are going to happen when you're, a mom and you're working and, their world is their world, and you just got to, fit in where it makes sense, and they will survive and you'll survive.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into authenticity, right? Because what an authentic moment. And, what I see, because I'm constantly have the authenticity lens, is like, I can't imagine how many women in that crowd, if they knew what was going on, were inspired by that. Well, your immediate thought was, this is a disaster. This is a mess. They're going, oh my God, I freaking love her. She's not perfect. She has the same challenges I either have or expect to have. So speaking of authenticity, obviously really strong leader. That's what drove you, as you mentioned, to always kind of go for that next thing. And that's sort of in your DNA. But beyond just taking an initiative, and I've seen you plenty of times, I would consider you very much an authentic leader, authentic person. And part of that is sometimes bucking the norm, right? Like going against the grain in how you do things. Is there a time that comes to mind or a certain thing that was your thing where you're like, I am not going to do it, quote unquote, executive way. I'm not going to do it the normal way. I'm going to do it my own authentic way.
Remember I told you the story about where I was promoted and I was second guessing my capability to do that. My first thing was to really create that real close leadership. My next layer, my next layer of leadership that were going to report to me. And then I actually got a room in the basement with no windows. Where, it was like this clandestine place where I knew the outside factors that were very scary and very disruptive. And I got them in the room and I said, we can either eat or have our lunch. What do you want to be? And I threw it all out there. And for 2 days, we formulated a plan that was going to take out $120 million in 2 years and advance our capability in the process. And I came in and threw that down to the leadership team and said, either you got me in this role, either you trust me to deliver on this, or you need to find somebody else.
And they didn't ask you to find the 120 million.
No, I knew that there was an RFS out there, and I actually got my hand. You know me, I'm well networked, so I got my hands on them. I knew what I was up against because what the suppliers were putting out was a 4-year plan to do that, and I delivered a plan that did it in 2. And not only was that a huge lift for the organization, it was a galvanizing moment for my leadership team. So now we were in control.
Yeah.
And, we had to make hard decisions. I mean, it wasn't an easy plan by any stretch, but it was a doable plan. And we were steering the ship. So, yeah, that was a big one. And it's funny, you had sent some questions ahead of time, and I actually thought about one where you said, what was the one thing that I had to change, right? That helped me. And one of the things that, and I actually learned this from, everybody gets these 360s, right? Mm-hmm. And my 360s, very, very similar to the way you described me. Oh, she's so sweet. She's so nice. Everybody loves her, right? But there really wasn't any feedback about how I was delivering these amazing results and how I was driving business strategy. There was none of those agenda qualities were coming out. And I actually had a coach that said, you need to brag. And that is not in my DNA. I'm a Catholic, girl, humility. I'm a servant leader. And bragging is like, I'm not going to brag about myself. And she said something very important to me. She was bragging about other people in your organization and what they're doing is bragging about yourself, but you're also lifting the organization. So I actually went to a seminar with NAFE, which is the National Association of Female Executives, and they had a session on how to brag. And what was really cool was here you are in a room with all these senior vice presidents, and everybody there is just extremely accomplished in Fortune 50 companies. And we all, when we went through the exercise, had a very hard time bragging and really distilling what our value story was in 2 sentences. So I went from saying, well, I run, infrastructure and technology, and there's engineering and operations and application development, right? That's not what I did. I run the technology strategy for a $64 billion company and actually did multi-million cost saving initiatives that return $3 per share. See the difference?
Yeah.
So I actually practice bragging.
So funny. I talk about, one of the things I coach on is because you talked about being very humble. I actually coach on, for example, I have them come up with an intriguing intro, which is kind of a little bit of your brag moment, but part of the formula I actually teach is that you weave in a story, a humility moment. I often equate it to like a singer, right? If you listen to American Idol, right? The singer doesn't hit the big note from the beginning, right? They play slow and sort of unassuming. And what that does is it makes that big note moment so much more powerful because of the contrast. So I love that you say that, because one of the things I coach is that these humility moments, one, it creates connection, right? Because people are like, oh my God, I can't believe she did. Like, I always make fun of like how bad I was and failed out tutorial. And, so I have a little fun with myself and I'm very humble. But then all of a sudden, I start to put in some of my big credentials, CEO of this company, and I did this. And it's like the what I call the big brag moment. It's like it's nicely intertwined where it feels like it's better accepted. But I want to go back to something you talked about. I think for our listeners, it's so important. I mean, so many people that I talk to, especially I coach a lot of women, sort of those high performance, high potential women, and the common thread is they don't say I want X title, I want this job. It's I want a voice and I want a seat at the table, right? That's the biggest, I think, desire, right? I want to go from somebody telling me what I have to do to actually having influence and making decisions for the company, the division, the organization. And, I know the story you told about, sort of, let's say, see the writing on the wall and going to your team and saying, let's preempt this, let's come up with our own plan. I knew you were at a senior level position, but it sounds like that was kind of the thread throughout your career. And I think it's so important for our listeners to hear, what's the best and quickest way to get a seat at the table? It's to create it yourself, right? It's to do the things that nobody told you to do that are uncomfortable, right? I'm sure in that plan, there were job eliminations and there was, there were people impacted. Like you said, there were tough decisions. But I love how you gave that example. And I think that's probably a big thread of why, you really, like you said, you didn't want somebody else to have to tell. Part of what driving you is like, it's a lot more fun when we come up with the idea ourselves versus somebody, handing us an edict. So that's such a great lesson for our listeners. So I want to just ask you a couple more questions. Was there one thing in your career that you were totally unwilling to compromise on? Like if I said, you do whatever it takes, but you will not compromise this. What was that?
I've been in scenarios where some decisions might compromise my integrity. First of all, I had amazing parents. They're A's. I got A's. I was very, very lucky. And my mother had said, and she had died when I was young. I was only 18. And she had said to me, and she goes, Renee, you may not be the smartest person in the room and have all the answers. Don't let anyone question your integrity. You cannot get that back. And there have been scenarios, when you're wheeling and dealing in multi-million-dollar deals with suppliers and B2B relations, you know how it goes. You do question some of the intentions of where the company is going. And so that's where, I always kind of go to my moral compass and say, does this action inspire trust and hold the line? And I always did. And I always will, because, I don't want anybody to question my integrity. I may not know the content. I may not be prepped. But don't question. Don't have people question your integrity.
Yeah, so good. So good. So 2 more questions. What breaks your heart?
Honestly, seeing sick children breaks my heart. It really does. So that's why I've always tried to align myself to charities and, supporting. because children are so resilient. And I'm even surprised with when the pandemic happened, how, I got to wear a mask. I mean, you can get a 2-year-old to wear a mask, right? They're super resilient, and they're not, I get upset when you see children that are just up against so much adversity. And especially if they can't get the right resources and attention they need, that breaks my heart.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Well, the last question, as you can imagine, you know me, it's kind of a fun one. Keep it light. So I don't know about you. Maybe I'm alone in this, but I have always had this like constant running thing in my head of like, if I ever had to do a stand-up routine, like what are some of the things I would make fun of, I would laugh at? And what one category in my head is like all the things in the world that just make no sense to me. And this is really obscure, right? It's sort of Seinfeldish, right? Like really stupid, silly things in the world.
Right.
And one of those things that always is on that list is, why does an elevator not have an undo button on it?
An undo? Like go back to where I was?
You know how many times you've been on it's 72 floors and you accidentally hit floor, 16, supposed to go to 18. And so when I saw that you took the role last year at Otis, and obviously in technology, I was like, oh my God, maybe Renee can finally put an undo button. Is that your product roadmap?
Yeah, you know what? Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised, because technology is gonna, because one of the things first of all, when I went to Otis, there was a couple of things that inspired me to take the challenge, right? One was they were becoming a standalone company. And so pretty much a white sheet of paper, knowing I had a lot of legacy to deal with and a lot of disentanglement from the parent company, I kind of had a white sheet of paper to transform. So that was super exciting. But also, meeting our CEO, and her vision for a connected world, and she's just fantastic, and safety is one of the biggest absolutes, right? And when the pandemic hit, right, think about the elevator, right? And you don't realize how dependent you are on your transportation and how it's ingrained into the fabric of how our cities and residential buildings run. And now all of a sudden, we have to come up with new ideas for touchless, for, air quality. We just published an air quality research paper. So now it's, I came from health, and now I'm in sort of safety, industrial and safety, but that's quickly becoming health and safety, right?
Yeah.
But don't be surprised with some of the technologies you're going to see in elevators soon. And I'm excited to be in the beginning part of that journey.
Oh my God, you just made elevators so sexy and cool. I hadn't even thought about, pandemic and cool things. And no, that's amazing. And yeah, I know Judy Marks is your CEO. It's worth noting too for our listeners, the female CEO of a very, I'm sure, engineering, predominantly male sort of industry. And
she had me at hello.
Yeah. I've heard nothing but great things about her. So thank you so much. I'm sure our listeners are going to want to crush on you. I know you're not big on social media, but follow you on LinkedIn. What's the best way for them to just sort of watch?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. And, I am going to be doing some webinars soon, and I plan to do some speaking on the CIO circuit. So it's just awesome to connect with you today, Erin. I'm so proud of you and what you've done and how brave you were. I remember you going through that decision making, and I'm like, you are 100 times braver than me. And I wish you all the success, and can't wait to talk again.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being here. You're so sweet. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey girl, I cannot believe that we have recorded over 50 episodes from the virtual couch every week. But we don't make any bank. We're doing this for the love and not for the money.
Yeah, can I be honest? I kind of thought we'd kill each other by this point. So, resident do-gooder, what can people do to help us keep going?
Well, since you asked, a couple of things. One, you can rate or review the podcast on your favorite app. That would be awesome. You can subscribe and get us in your favorite podcast app feed weekly. Also awesome. You don't even have to look for us. But most importantly, share the love. Let people know your virtual secret. You're hanging out here and you're getting some virtual work-life therapy and everything in between. Invite a friend and expand their virtual universe. And the reason why? Because it's bold, it's badass, and it's basically better than drinking alone.